Hi, I'm Raylyn Worcester, and this is Spreading the Word. That is Word with a capital W, as in the written word, the Bible, and the Word made flesh, Jesus Christ. Today, I want to share a short story with you. It's actually about an hour and 20 minutes long, but it's really powerful, and I think you're going to enjoy it. It's called Resurrection Power. Resurrection Power is the story of a young woman who died and was brought back to life by the resurrection power of Jesus Christ. After this miraculous event, every relationship she had received new life by that same resurrection power. It's a touching and heartwarming story of faith and redemption, and I just know you're going to enjoy it. So, without further ado, here is Resurrection Power by Raylyn Worcester. The Incident. Beep. The long, steady, high-pitched tone emitted as a long, flat line appeared on the screen of the heart monitor. In the seconds before emergency personnel could rush into the room was bathed in a warm, bright light, and a voice whispered into the patient's ear, "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live." Then, as suddenly as the light appeared, it was gone. Doctors and nurses rushed in with a crash cart in response to the code blue, frantically trying to revive the 19-year-old girl whose heart had just quit beating. The atmosphere was one of controlled chaos. Machines crackled, whirred, and beeped. Doctors barked orders. Nurses hurriedly complied. The pads were placed on the young girl's bared chest, and her body arched in response to the jolt sent through her. No response. The anxiety in the room ramped up a notch. Again. This time, a faint blip registered on the monitor. As emergency procedures continued, a calm came over the room. 5 minutes later, Virginia Lynn opened her eyes and with a smile asked, "How long have I been sleeping?" 4 hours before the incident. Virginia Lynn padded into the kitchen as quickly as her swollen body would allow to stir the pot that was boiling away on the stove. If the phrase barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen had an origin, it most assuredly was with her. She replaced the lid and was headed to the fridge to get the vegetables when a wail pierced the air. "Oh, Betty Sue, not now," she sighed, but the cry grew more insistent and would not be denied. "I'm coming, baby," she hollered. She arrived in the room to find her 13-month-old daughter standing in her crib, holding on to the rails, face red and crumpled, with a soggy cloth diaper sagging near her knees. "Poor baby, you're soaked," she cooed as she lifted the child from the crib and placed her on the rag rug on the floor. Behind her, a tiny voice said, "Mama, I'm hungry." "Bobby Joe, you are always hungry," she replied, fetching a diaper and pins from a nearby drawer. "Supper is—" Supper! She'd forgotten the pot boiling in the kitchen. "Watch your sister. I'll be right back." She waddled once more into the kitchen to the stove. She lifted the lid and discovered that all the water had boiled out, leaving the homemade noodles that she had painstakingly rolled and cut, a gelatinous blob stuck to the bottom of the pan. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes. What would she do now? Hank could be home any minute. But Jenny Lynn had no time to sit and sulk. She carried the pan to the trash and scraped the remnants of supper into it before depositing the pot in the sink. Then she rushed back to the two little girls she'd left in the makeshift nursery of the three-room shack in which they lived. Bobby Joe met her at the door. "Look, Mama, I helped," she said proudly, grabbing her mother's hand and tugging her into the room. The sound that escaped Jenny Lin's lips was part chuckle, part sob. There on the rag rug she'd braided with her own hands lay her baby girl, with a clean cloth diaper wrapped sarong style around her waist, both legs protruding from the single opening. No longer crying, she cooed happily as a new puddle pooled beneath her, missing the diaper skirt altogether, allowing the braided rug to do its job instead. "Uh-oh, she peed," Bobby Joe said. "I'll get another diaper, Mama." "Thank you, baby," she replied. Bobby Joe was such a good girl, always trying to help. "And get Mama the towel from the bathroom, too, okay?" she hollered after the little girl. She was just fastening the last pin and blotting up the puddle on the rug when she heard the crunch of gravel on the drive, followed by the slam of a truck door. "Quick, go get in Mama's bed," she told Bobby Joe as she settled the baby once more into her crib. "But Mama, I'm hungry," the little girl wailed. "I'll bring you something right quick, but go get you in the bed now. Daddy's home." For a man who enjoyed making them so much, her husband couldn't stand having children underfoot. He rarely acknowledged them and never kissed or cuddled them. They could be tolerated as long as they disappeared into the background, so Jenny Lin made sure they did. Her 3-year-old little girl seemed to somehow instinctively understand this, and ran to the bedroom, climbed up onto the double bed, and snuggled down into the covers, the thin single blanket barely muffling the sound of her growling tummy. "Jenny Lin, where are you, girl?" Hank bellowed as he entered the living room kitchen area. There was no aroma of dinner cooking when he'd entered, nothing on the stove. He slammed the oven door shut. Nothing in the oven. What has that lazy wench been doing all day, he wondered, getting madder by the minute. Jenny Lin pulled the baby blanket she'd crocheted up over the now sleeping infant and walked quietly from the room to deal with the next issue requiring her immediate attention, her husband. She smoothed down the apron she still wore over her threadbare dress, tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, plastered a smile on her face, and walked bravely into the other room. "Howdy, Hank. How was your day?" she asked as she approached. It was just a formality. She could smell the whiskey on him as soon as she entered the room. She knew how his day had gone. He hadn't gone to work. Again. Had spent the day with the boys, coon hunting and drinking. "How was my day?" he snarled. "About as productive as yours, I'd say. Where's my dinner?" She wanted to tell him about the homemade noodles she'd made with the last of the flour. It was meant to be a special treat for him, but he didn't like to hear excuses. She'd be better off not mentioning it at all. "I've got some salt pork and collard greens," she offered. "Only take a minute," she said, hurrying toward the fridge. "Run me a bath first," he ordered, pulling off a boot and leaving it lying on the kitchen floor. He headed toward the door and the outhouse, leaving a trail of clothes behind him as he went. The shack in which she lived had 3 rooms. The front door opened into a large room in which sat a threadbare couch, a rocking chair, a wood-burning stove, and a kitchen table which Hank had made himself, back when he had drive and ambition and something to live for. 3 lawn chairs sat around the table, the webbing only coming off of one of them, which was reserved for Bobby Joe when she was allowed to join them for a meal. There was a metal kitchen sink, a 3-burner stove, a small oven, an ice box, which she called the fridge, and a freestanding wooden cupboard. The second room held their double bed, a wood cable spool, which acted as a nightstand, holding an oil lamp, and an old bureau that belonged to Hank's mama before she died. The third room was half the size of the master bedroom. In it was Betty Sue's crib, a mattress on the floor for Bobby Joe, and a 2-drawer chest that held both girls' clothes and the baby's diapers. Part of this room had been partitioned off with curtains to create a bathroom. It held shelves with 2 towels, homemade lye soap, and a washcloth, and had a wash tub for baths and washing clothes. All necessities were done in the outhouse behind the shack. The shack had electricity, though Hank rarely allowed it to be used, as it was expensive and money scarce. They also had running water in the kitchen. It was this she now carried in buckets to the wash tub for Hank's bath, walking as quickly as the heavy buckets allowed without sloshing to fill the tub before he returned from the privy. Hank was strutting into the bathroom naked as a jaybird as she poured in the last bucket of water. She handed him the soap and left the room, picking up discarded clothing on her way back to the kitchen. She quickly got the collard greens on to boil, then, fetching a tin from the cupboard, pulled out several soda crackers and covered them with a thin layer of real butter, given to her by the church ladies who checked on her from time to time. This she hid away in a sardine can where Hank wouldn't find it. He hated sardines, but she said the oil provided nutrition for the child growing inside her, so he allowed her to have it, but never touched it himself, making this the perfect hiding place. She took the buttered crackers to Bobby Joe, who had fallen asleep in the double bed, gently shook her awake, and encouraged her to eat. "Mind you don't get any crumbs in the bed," Jenny Lind warned. The little girl nodded and licked off the butter before hungrily consuming the crackers, which comprised her dinner. She snuggled beneath the blanket once more, eyelids heavy. Jenny Lind kissed her daughter's forehead and left the room. She would move her to the mattress once Hank was out of the bath. A steaming bowl of collard greens and salt pork and a few soda crackers awaited Hank as he sat at the table, clad only in a worn pair of breeches. Jenny Lind handed him a glass of lemonade she'd squeezed herself, which he instantly swatted from her hand, sending liquid flying and the glass to the floor, where it shattered into tiny pieces. "Beer! Get me a beer!" he grumbled. Jenny Lind stepped gingerly around the broken glass toward the fridge to retrieve his last beer. "And clean up that mess," he yelled. "Not like you ever do a damn thing around this place." She found the broom and began to collect the glass shards into a pile, which she scooped up with a piece of cardboard she used as a dustpan, and deposited the glass on top of the ruined noodles in the trash. Taking a deep breath, she looked at her husband and dared to broach the subject she knew would make him angrier than he already was. "Hank, I used the last of the flour today. We have no milk, and the hens aren't laying. I've only got 3 jars left from the cannon I did last September, and that salt pork you just ate was the last of the meat. We need some groceries." His face took on the look of thunder as he rose from the table. "Where did it all go?" he bellowed. You sit around all day eating while I'm out scrounging up work? He grabbed Jenny Lind by the arm and gave her a shove. Answer me. No, Hank, I swear I haven't eaten today at all. I've been busy taking care of the girls and doing laundry, and he shoved her again. This time her bare foot slipped on some of the spilled lemonade, and she fell hard onto the floor. She let out a cry as she fell. Hank stood over her glaring as she tried to right herself and push herself up off the floor. She felt a sharp sting in the heel of her hand, and she pushed down on the floor for leverage and saw a glass shard embedded in the quickly swelling flesh. Mama? A little voice inquired as Bobby Joe entered the room. The commotion had woken her up. Her eyes widened and she screamed as she saw her mother lying on the floor with a piece of glass stuck in her hand. She ran over to her and tried to help her up. What's she doing in here? Hank roared, spinning around to face the child. Quick, baby, run to the nursery and get on your bed. Lock the door behind you. Go now, Jenny Lind urged. Frightened, Bobby Joe hesitated, looking from her mother to her father, then back to her mother again. Hank took one step toward his daughter, and the spell was broken. Bobby Joe's little legs took her off as quickly as they could into the nursery. Jenny Lind heaved a sigh of relief as she heard the door lock click. No good little pieces of shit, Hank screamed. He walked over to his wife, still lying on the floor, and kicked her in the stomach. And you're not having another one. Should have taken a coat hanger to you when I found out about this one. Would have been a lot easier. He punctuated each sentence with another kick to his wife's pregnant belly. Jenny Lind had tried to get off the floor, but with the glass in her hand had no purchase. She rolled to her side to try to shield her baby, but Hank just walked around and positioned himself where he could do the most damage. With each kick, she let out a muffled scream, stuffing her apron in her mouth so Bobby Joe wouldn't hear and be frightened, so she wouldn't wake the baby. The pain was excruciating, and she was bleeding profusely. At some point, she passed out. Hank took that as his cue to go out and get some more beer. A mile away, their closest neighbor, Dottie Cummings, shut the book she was reading and told her husband, I'm going to go lay down. I've got a headache. Okay, hon, her husband replied with a peck to the cheek. Feel better. I'll be along after a bit. Dottie went into her room and lay down. She didn't change into bedclothes. Neither did she climb under the covers. She just turned out the light and closed her eyes. Go check on Jenny and the babies. Where had that thought come from, she wondered. Though they were her closest neighbors, Dottie and Chuck rarely crossed paths with Virginia and Hank Sutter. In fact, they avoided them whenever possible. Oh, she felt sorry for that young girl, saddled with 2 babies and pregnant again. Yes, hers was a sad situation. But Dottie was afraid of Hank, didn't like being around him. She shook the thought off and closed her eyes once more. Go check on Jenny and the babies. Take your cell phone. There it was again, more insistent this time. Chuck, she called, let's take a ride. I want to check on Jenny and the babies. Hank was following an ambulance as he made his way home from the liquor store. It stayed a ways ahead of him as it sped toward its destination, with lights blazing and sirens blaring. Where was it going, he wondered. It was making all the same turns he was. When the ambulance pulled down his drive, realization dawned. He parked his truck in the bushes and walked toward his house amid the trees where he wouldn't be seen. Jenny Lind was being wheeled on a gurney into the back of the ambulance. He waited until the ambulance left to walk into the house. He went into the kitchen and took in the scene. His empty beer bottle and dinner bowl were still on the table. There was a big pool of blood on the floor and little pink pieces of something floating in it. The blood was smeared where Jenny Lind had been lifted from the floor, and there were shoe prints, probably from the paramedics, tracking blood all the way out the door. Next, he went into the nursery. Empty. Hank had no idea how Jenny Lind had gotten a hold of an ambulance or what she did with her brats. He didn't care. He shrugged, went into the living room, sat in the rocker, and popped the top on a beer. He was still sitting there when the police arrived. 4 years previously. Ha! 4 aces, Hank crowed, spreading the cards on the table. I win. Now pay up. Stan Parker shook his head. You done got all my cash. I ain't got nothing to pay with. A filthy grin stole over Hank's face. What about that sweet little gal of yours? I'll take her. Stan's face paled. You mean Virginia? She's only 15. What do you want with her? What do you think? He answered, waggling his eyebrows suggestively. I couldn't, Stan stammered. Hank picked up the shotgun he always kept behind the front door. Guess I'll have to settle your debt another way then, he said, leveling the gun at Stan. Stan gulped. You'll marry her at least, won't you? Sure, why not? Hank agreed. He was in a good mood tonight. The cards had been good to him, almost as good as his unnoticed sleight of hand had been. Stan didn't have to think long about his options. He'd missed the girl. Well, he'd missed the cooking and cleaning she'd done since her ma died and left them alone together. But he lost, and he had nothing else to pay with. I'll send her over tomorrow, Stan said in a resigned tone. Me and the preacher'll be waiting, Hank chuckled as Stan left the house. He scooped up the cards, including the 5th ace that had been hidden in his sleeve, and put them in the bureau in his room. Then he went to bed. Tomorrow couldn't get here soon enough. Virginia was still up when Stan got home from the poker game. You didn't have to wait up, he said, feeling even more guilty than he had after leaving Hank's place. I wanted to make sure you ate something. I know you guys just drink when you play cards. I made you a sandwich, she said, walking into the kitchen. He followed her in and motioned for her to join him at the table. He took a bite of the sandwich. It was good. She's a sweet kid. She didn't deserve this. We need to have a talk, he started. Okay, she said with a smile. Oh, God, she has no idea what's coming. How do I do this? You're a young lady now, Virginia, he started, of marrying age. Virginia laughed. Oh, Papa, seriously? I haven't even started dating. Who would I marry? Stan looked down at the table. He couldn't meet her eye. Well, now, it's a father's job to choose a good man for his daughter to marry. I chose one for you. Virginia's eyes got big. Who? Hank Sutter. Hank Sutter? Papa, he's old. He's got to be your age. He's not even 40 yet, Stan defended. Anyway, an older man knows how to take care of a woman, and you're marrying him, and that's that. Virginia's eyes filled with tears. When? She asked with a sob. Tomorrow. The next day, Stan loaded up Virginia and her one suitcase of clothes and drove them over to Hank's house. As promised, Hank had a preacher waiting there. The two men were waiting on the front porch for Stan and Virginia to arrive. At Stan's insistence, Virginia wore her nicest dress. It was her Sunday go-to-meeting dress that she wore every Sunday to the Baptist church in town. It was the same dress she wore the day she gave her heart to Jesus and got baptized. Now it would be her wedding dress. Stan had stopped along the way to pick some wildflowers and now thrust them into his daughter's hands as she stood opposite Hank on the porch. To his credit, Hank had bathed and shaved, and his clothes looked relatively clean, Stan noticed. Maybe it won't be so bad after all, he thought. The whole affair took 5 minutes. Both parties said I do, he eagerly, she reluctantly. The preacher pronounced them man and wife. Hank kissed her chastely on the cheek, and it was done. Hank didn't have a ring for her, but promised he'd get one with his next paycheck. The preacher shook hands with Hank and Stan. Stan hugged his daughter for the last time. Then both men left, and the newlyweds were alone. Hank picked up Virginia's suitcase and carried it inside. Come on in, he invited. This is your home now. Virginia walked in and looked around. She tried very hard not to let the horror show on her face. This is where you live? She asked. Where we live, he corrected with a grin. He set the suitcase inside the door and led her to the couch. Tell me about your house, she invited. Well, my ma and pa wanted to live off the grid. Pa bought the land, and this house was constructed as a temporary place to live while we worked on the homestead. Then Ma contracted some sickness and died, and Pa just up and left. Well, I didn't know how to build a homestead, so I just kept living here. She nodded. So this was meant to be temporary. She could make it nicer. She would, she determined. And what do you do for a living? She asked. Oh, this and that, he answered evasively. I get by. Now I got a question, Hank said. She nodded. What kind of name is Virginia? I can't hardly say it. My name is Virginia Lynn. I go by Jenny sometimes. I will call you Jenny Lynn, he decided. She nodded her approval. Does you cook and clean? She nodded again. Only one thing left then, he said with a grin. What's that? She asked. Honeymoon time. Virginia quickly learned that honeymoon time didn't just occur on the night of her wedding, but any time Hank had a hankering, and especially whenever he'd been drinking, which she quickly discovered was most of the time. She was with child before her 16th birthday. She also learned that Hank didn't like church and refused to let Jenny Lynn go once they'd married. He rarely worked, and when he did, it was just odd jobs for pocket change. He enjoyed coon hunting and traded the pelts for groceries. He never got an actual paycheck, and she never got a wedding ring. Her life quickly fell into a routine of cooking, cleaning, babies, and learning to avoid the wrath of Hank when his drinking made him mean. The Baptist ladies inquired of Virginia from Stan, who shared that she was now married to Hank Sutter and was expecting Stan's first grandchild. Their hearts went out to the young sister in Christ, who had to grow up so quickly, and they routinely snuck over when Hank was out to bring little gifts and words of encouragement. They also introduced her to Dottie Cummings, who happened to be her closest neighbor. Though she rarely saw Dottie, she liked her and was glad that they had met. The day after the incident. "Hi, sweetie," the charge nurse said as she poked her head into the room. "Are you up to visitors?" Miraculously, she was. She knew all of it. She knew that Hank kicked her baby to death in the kitchen. She knew she lost so much blood and suffered internal organ damage that she died. And she knew that the voice who whispered in her ear before the doctors arrived brought her back to life. And she knew why. He had a work for her to do. He continued to speak to her after she woke up. She knew he would always be with her, no matter what was asked of her, and she was at peace. She nodded, and her first visitor was admitted. It was Dottie Cummings. "Hi, Dottie," Virginia said weakly. "How are my babies?" A sad look passed over Dottie's face as her gaze traveled from Virginia's face to her midsection. I wish I had gotten there sooner. If I had, maybe your baby would still be alive." Her face crumpled and her eyes filled with tears. Virginia patted Dottie's hand consolingly. "No, Dottie. You came when the Lord called you, and I'm so grateful you did. I'm asking about Bobby Joe and Betty Sue." Dottie's eyes lit up once more. "Oh, they are just fine. Chuck is watching them while I visit with you, but they've each had baths and a nice big breakfast, and this afternoon we will take them to the park. It's such a joy having babies in the house again. How we've missed it. We will keep them as long as you need." She whispered her thanks as she started to nod off. Dottie took her leave. Virginia went to sleep knowing her daughters were safe and were in good hands. Immediately after her heartbeat was stabilized the night before, she'd been taken into surgery. She had a hysterectomy. They hated to perform them on one so young, but the damage was too severe to save the organs. They'd had no choice. She also had several blood transfusions. Now she only needed to rest and recover, but was warned it could be slow going. Trauma such as she'd endured took time to recover from. She would be weak and tired for quite some time. Because of this, she was allowed only 2 30-minute visits per day. The rest of the time, she must rest. Her second visitor of the day was her father. Stan Parker looked as if he had aged 20 years in the last 4. He was gaunt, his skin was gray, his eyes lifeless. He entered the room stooped over, as if he had the weight of the world upon his shoulders. And indeed he had. He carried a bouquet, not of the wildflowers he'd picked for her impromptu wedding, but actual store-bought flowers, a rare splurge for Stan. Virginia's eyes were closed as he approached the bed, barely daring to breathe lest he disturb her. She opened her eyes and smiled. "Hi, Papa." "Oh, Virginia, I've been so worried," he cried. "How are you doing? Are you all right?" She nodded, but with tears in her voice, answered, "I lost the baby, though." "I am so sorry, honey, for everything." He broke down and wept, great sobs racking his body, face in his hands. "It's all my fault, all my fault," he kept saying through the tears. She reached out to grab his hand. "No, Papa, it's Hank's fault. He did this, not you." Shaking his head violently from side to side, pounding on his chest with his other fist, he insisted, "You don't know. You don't understand. Hank is my fault." "I know, Papa," she softly whispered. "I know about the poker game. Hank gloated about it on one of his drunken rants years ago. He also told me he cheated, so you were sure to lose. He bragged about making you choose between your life and making me his wife. He wanted me to hate you." Stan lifted red-rimmed eyes to meet his daughter's. "And do you hate me?" "No, Papa. I love you. And I'd like you to have a relationship with your granddaughters." Stan took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. It felt as if a ton of weight had been lifted from them, and he smiled for the first time in years. "I love you too, Virginia Lynn, and I'd love to get to know my granddaughters." It was the first time in 19 years she'd heard her father utter those three precious words. It was a long time coming, but well worth the wait. Resurrection power had been breathed into a dead relationship, and love lived once more. The next day brought two more visitors, these more official than personal. The first was the admin aide of the hospital. She had paperwork that needed signatures regarding the emergency procedures and surgeries she'd undergone. She needed to update her contact information and let them know about any medications she was taking. As she looked carefully through the papers, Jenny noticed that there was one missing. "Don't you need my insurance information?" she asked. The aide smiled and said, "Actually, we don't. Your financial obligation to us has all been taken care of by an anonymous benefactor." She saw Jenny's brow furrow and added, "And don't you dare ask about them. I'm not allowed to tell. Just know that all of the hospital bills, as well as medications and follow-up appointments, are all being taken care of. You need worry about nothing. You only need to rest and heal." "I can do that," she said, closing her eyes. Suddenly, she was exhausted again. The aide gathered the papers and tiptoed from the room. Her afternoon visitor was a police detective. "If you are up to it, we need to ask you about the events preceding your trip to the hospital." In a voice devoid of emotion, she relayed the events as they happened. The detective listened carefully and took notes. "Has Hank been arrested?" she asked when she finished her tale. "Yes, for assault, and he is being detained in the county jail for now." "How long will he be there?" she asked. "That's up to you," the detective answered. "I don't understand," she replied. "I understand he kicked your unborn baby to death." She swallowed the tears that were gathering in her throat and nodded. "If you want to press charges, he can be charged with murder, or at the very least, manslaughter. He could serve anywhere from 10 years to life in prison. However, a wife does not have to testify against her husband, and if you choose not to do so, he will only face assault charges, which could result in probation only if he gets a lenient judge. So it's really up to you." "Do I have to decide right now?" she asked. The detective looked at the battered woman in the bed with compassion. "She is so young." "No, let's let him sweat it out in county for a bit. I'll come see you again next week, okay?" She nodded her thankfulness and was dozing before the officer hit the door. Hank had just spent his third night in the county lockup. It was his third night without any sleep. His reputation preceded him to this place, and before he even hit his cell, Taunts of baby killer filled the air. Better hope they never let you out of that cell, baby killer. Better hope we can't get to you. Can't wait to show you what every single one of us would do to a baby killer. He was terrified. Not only that, but he didn't feel good. He'd been 3 days without alcohol in his system. His hands shook, his head ached, and he felt like he was going to die. Worst of all was his clear head. Without alcohol fogging his brain, he could think clearly, and those clear thoughts tormented him. When his mother had gotten ill, she'd been pregnant. When she died, his sister died with her. This was the reason Hank didn't want children around. They reminded him of the sister that was taken from him before he even got a chance to get to know her. He'd been terrified that if he got to know his daughters, came to love them, something would happen to them, and he would experience the pain of that loss all over again. So he distanced himself from them. But now, one of his own children was dead, and he was responsible. He knew it was the alcohol that fueled a rage over stupid minor things. Without the alcohol, things could be different. But not now. Now it was too late. Now he had ruined everything. "Sutter, you've got a visitor," the guard said, unlocking the cell and ushering a young man in. "Who are you?" Hank asked gruffly. The kid didn't look any older than Jenny Lind. At the thought of her name, sadness once again engulfed him. I'm your court-appointed attorney," he stuttered. "You're an attorney?" Hank asked in disbelief. "Just past my bar," he nodded. "You're my first case." "No way," Hank exclaimed. "Get me someone else." There is no one else," the lawyer explained. "No one in 3 counties wanted to represent a babe. You," he finished lamely. Hank put his head in his hands. Could things get any worse? "Well, who are you then? And what are you going to do for me?" he finally asked. "Henry Willoughby Barnes, attorney at law," he said, extending his hand. "Pleased to meet you." Hank shook his hand, but didn't return the sentiment. "Well?" Hank asked. Oh, yes. "Well, we are waiting to see if your wife is going to choose to testify against you or not. If she does, you will be charged with murder for the death of the unborn child, which I will plead down to manslaughter. That should only get you about 10 years in prison, as opposed to life." 10 years in general population, where everyone will want to show me how they treat baby killers, he thought. He shuddered. "What if she won't testify?" he asked. "Best case scenario. Then you're only charged with assault and can stay here in this cell, or I may be able to get you out on probation as it's a first offense." "How long does she have to decide?" Hank asked. "The end of this week. Right now she is still in a critical care unit. They are supposed to move her to a regular room beginning of the week." Shame and remorse instantly and unexpectedly flooded Hank. His wife, who only treated him good, who he only mistreated from the day she entered his home, the woman he'd left lying on the kitchen floor in her own blood, was still in critical care 4 days later. "Can I write to her?" he asked. "Good idea. Make a plea. I'll have paper and a pen sent in." The lawyer rose and left without another word. The day nurse had just finished taking her vitals and said, "The doctor will be in shortly to talk to you." "Oh, yeah." Fishing in her scrubs pocket and pulling out an envelope, handed it to Virginia, saying, "I nearly forgot. This came for you this morning. See you later, sweetie." Who could be sending her a letter, she wondered. Maybe the mysterious benefactor? She had asked both her father and Dottie, and neither admitted to knowing anything about the person anonymously paying for her medical expenses. It truly was a mystery. She turned the envelope over and froze. Stamped on the back was County Correctional Facility. Hank. Why would Hank be sending her a letter? What could he possibly have to say to her? She wanted nothing that he might have to say. That was for sure. Read the letter. The voice from the incident spoke from within. No, I'm sorry, Lord, I can't. Her womb ached with the emptiness it carried. Her heart ached with missing the two living daughters she was unable to see until she got out of the hospital. And Hank had caused it all. She tossed the envelope unopened onto the bedside table, turned toward the wall, and closed her eyes. Dr. Cressley strode into the room, interrupting her thoughts. "How's my favorite patient today?" he asked. "I bet you say that to all the patients," she replied with a twinkle. "I will neither confirm nor deny that allegation," he said, "but I can admit to you being my fastest healing patient. All your vitals look good, and your incisions are all healing nicely. 2 more days and you can go to the regular ward. Do another week there just to be sure no infection sets in, and then you'll be able to go home." Well, that was good news at least. The next day seemed to drag. She was not nearly as tired and lethargic as she had been. She was feeling much better, and with news of her impending move to the regular ward, she was no longer receiving visitors in critical care. She was bored. If only she had something to read. Like a moth drawn to a flame, her eyes landed on the envelope on the bedside table. "Read the letter," the familiar voice instructed again. She closed her eyes as spirit and flesh wrestled. "Well, the detective is coming tomorrow for an answer as to whether I will testify against Hank or not." Everything within her wanted to lock him up forever and throw away the key. Yet something caused her to hesitate. What and why? She didn't know. "Maybe something Hank says in the letter will give me reason to decide one way or the other," she decided. With some trepidation, she opened the envelope. She read the letter slowly, carefully, digesting every word, searching for motive behind the words, searching for subterfuge or manipulation. She closed the letter and wept briefly. Drying her eyes, she opened the letter and read it once more. "Jenny Lind, I know you hate me. I don't blame you. I hate me too. My Lord tells me you have to decide whether to testify against me or not. You should. It's what I deserve. I am a bad man. I was a bad husband. I am an alcoholic and a baby killer." The LER was slightly smudged. By a teardrop, perhaps? She continued reading. "I deserve whatever I have coming to me. But you didn't deserve anything I did to you. Our baby didn't deserve to die. Our other 2 girls didn't deserve to be ignored or scared or treated bad. I am so sorry for all I done. It's okay if you never forgive me. I don't think even God could forgive me for all the bad things I done. I just wanted you to know that I am sober now, 4 days, and thinking clear, and I'm ready to take responsibility for the things I done. And even if you don't believe it, I know now the best thing I ever done was marry you, even if it was for the wrong reasons. Well, That's all I wanted to say. Your husband, Hank. Virginia folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. She carefully set it back on the bedside table. Then she closed her eyes and searched her heart. The letter was sincere. She knew it was. And suddenly, she understood the reason she hesitated to tell the detective she would testify. God wanted to forgive Hank. He wanted her to forgive Hank. He wanted her to give him another chance. In that instant, she handed all the hurt to her Lord. Take it all, she told him. I don't want it to make decisions for me. I want to be the person you resurrected me to be. And just like that, in the twinkling of an eye, she forgave Hank. The emptiness in her womb and the hurt in her heart left. Resurrection power entered in, and healing began. Resurrection power at work. Congratulations, Mr. Sutter, the lawyer said, clapping Hank on the shoulder. Whatever you said in that letter must have done the trick. Your wife has decided not to testify against you. Really? Hank couldn't believe his ears. He was sure she would condemn him. He had already condemned himself. So, we go before the judge tomorrow on the charges of aggravated assault and push for probation. I will have a suit for you to wear dropped off later today. We leave at 8 a.m. and not a minute later, so be ready. The lawyer whistled as the guard led him out of the cell and relocked the door. He whistled all the way down the hall and out the door. Hank sat in stunned silence, unable to believe the gift of grace he'd just been given. All rise. The Honorable Judge Bledsoe presiding, the bailiff announced as the judge entered and took a seat at his bench. You may be seated. The judge spoke into the microphone before him. Will the defendant and his counsel please stand? Hank stood and adjusted the starched stiffness of the new shirt, feeling conspicuous in the new suit he was wearing. It was the first time in his life he'd worn such a thing, and he was quite uncomfortable in it. More to his liking were the flannel shirt, breeches, and boots he'd worn for his own wedding, but those would never do for a day as important as this. The judge now addressed Hank. In the case of the state versus Hank Sutter for the charge of aggravated assault, how do you plead? Hank cleared his throat and said, Guilty, Your Honor. Henry Willoughby Barnes drew in a sharp breath. He had advised Hank to plead no contest. He was likely to draw a lighter sentence with that plea. But the damage was done. Now he'd have to earn his money. He would defend the guilty plea. Next, the judge addressed the prosecution. Does the state have witnesses or a statement they'd like to present? He asked. We have a statement, Your Honor, the district attorney answered. He nodded. Proceed. The district attorney straightened his tie and addressed the bench. Your Honor, while Mrs. Sutter declined to press charges or testify against her husband for the murder of their unborn child, that is exactly what the defendant is guilty of. It is therefore the recommendation of the state that the judge find the defendant guilty of aggravated assault and impugn upon Mr. Sutter the maximum allowable sentence for said charge to be served at a federal prison. The DA returned to his seat. Counsel for the defendant, have you witnesses or a statement to present? The judge asked. We have a statement, Your Honor. Proceed. Hank stood. He didn't read from a paper. He knew exactly what he wanted to say. I am guilty of kicking my wife in her pregnant belly and killing my baby, he said with a sob. I am a baby killer and a bad man. I deserve to go to prison for a long time for what I'd done. But I am now 6 days sober and thinking clear. I know it's the liquor done made me angry and messed up my thinking to do such a bad thing. I ain't never drinking again, I swear. If she will let me, I will spend every day for the rest of my life treating my wife good, like she deserves, and my other 2 kids too. I am truly sorry for the horrible things I done. That's all I gotta say. He sat down. Counsel? Henry stood. Your Honor, I too have a statement. Proceed. This is the first time Mr. Sutter has been in court for any reason. He does not have so much as a speeding ticket. While he admits to the tragic actions that ended the life of his child, I believe there were extenuating circumstances which not only contributed to, but actually caused such actions, namely his problem with alcohol. Mr. Sutter has been attending AA classes while in the county correctional facility. He is determined to never drink again, and he is taking full responsibility for his actions. As such, I would recommend that he be sentenced to time served and be released upon probation. Thank you, Your Honor. Henry concluded his statement and took his seat next to Hank. The judge was silent for a moment, fingertips of both hands pressed together as he considered all he'd heard. I have heard both arguments and all statements and have reached a decision, he began. In the matter of the state versus Hank Sutton on the charge of aggravated assault, I find the defendant to be guilty. In the matter of sentencing, I do not find the need for prison time in this case, due to this being his first offense and due to extenuating circumstances. Henry shot Hank a self-satisfied little smile. We did it, it said. But neither do I agree with the leniency requested by the defense. The smug smile vanished. I hereby sentence Mr. Sutter to complete the AA classes which he has begun and serve 6 months' time under house arrest, with the stipulation that should 1 sip of alcohol pass his lips during this time, he will immediately be remanded into the custody of a federal penitentiary to serve a sentence of not less than 10 years. In addition, monthly drug testing shall be required for a period of 2 years, during which, if the presence of alcohol is detected, he will also serve the stipulated time in the federal prison. He rapped the gavel on the desk in front of him. Guard, please take Mr. Sutter to have his ankle bracelet fitted, after which time he will be free to go. Thank you. Court is adjourned. Henry drove Hank down the road leading to Hank's house and stopped at the beginning of his drive. He activated the ankle bracelet and the green light began to flash, then remained steady. He opened the door for Hank. You may go to the end of this drive in the front and to the tree line in the back, he told Hank. Any further and the red light will flash. You must make it back within the acceptable boundaries before it turns solid, or the police will come and arrest you, and you will be headed to the pen. Do you understand? Hank nodded. Henry shoved a paper and a plastic card in his hand. Here is a number you can call to have food and other supplies delivered to your door. And one more thing. You don't have a job and can't leave the house for work. Ordinarily, that would cause quite a problem for you. But last night, an anonymous benefactor came to my office and told me he opened an account in your name at the local bank in which he will deposit $1,000 every month. You may access the funds with this debit card and give the number as payment over the phone for anything which you may order. It's not a lot of money, but if you use wisdom, it should meet your needs. I, I don't know what to say, Hank stammered. Say thank you, he suggested. Thank you, Henry, for everything. Henry shook his hand, got back in the car, and took off. Hank stood at the base of his drive for a moment, thanking God or whoever for his good fortune. As he approached his home for the first time since his arrest, he looked around him. Everything looked different to him. He saw the tree line to his right that he'd hidden in to watch the ambulance take his wife away. Those trees are too thick. I will thin them out. No one will ever be able to lurk in them unseen again. He stopped at the porch, remembering how beautiful his new bride looked in her Sunday best, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. How had he taken that for granted? He crossed the porch and turned the knob and was instantly assaulted by memories. The couch where he sat with his new bride on their wedding day, the rocker where he sat and drank a beer after his wife bled out on the kitchen floor. That rocker is being hauled to the dump, he determined as he wiped a tear from his eye. The police tape had been removed once the court appearance was over, but the mess hadn't been cleaned. It had been left for him to do. The beer bottle and crusted dinner bowl still sat on the table. There was still blood, though congealed and darker now, dried lemonade, and an occasional sliver of glass on the floor. He spent the next 2 hours scrubbing every inch of the kitchen with hot water and the bleach he found in the wooden cupboard. He opened the windows to air the place out, and the fresh air that rushed in made the entire place feel fresh, clean, and new. Next, he went into his bedroom. He stripped the sheets from the bed, finding cracker crumbs as he did. He suddenly remembered that Bobby Joe had been in that bed last. The crackers must have been her dinner. Crackers for a growing child for dinner. What a wretched man I am. He let out an agonized scream as the truth of the thought pierced his soul. Then he gathered the sheets and scrubbed them in the washtub with the lye soap and hot water he carried in from the kitchen. These buckets are heavy. Jenny Lynn carried them while 8.5 months pregnant for my bath that last night, he remembered. She never once complained. How her back must have hurt. Self-loathing threatened to consume him. He scrubbed the sheets even harder, as if he could scrub away the damning memories. Once the sheets were hung over the railing of the front porch, he walked into the nursery. He was instantly assaulted by the pungent odor of urine that had been left to ripen in a warm, unventilated house for a week. He found the source to be the rag rug, which was now dried but stained yellow. He remembered how Jenny Lynn cut the clothes they'd outgrown or worn out into strips, then plaited them together to form a rug, which she then placed under the crib they bought at a second-hand store for the birth of Bobby Joe. He put the rug in the wash tub and carried fresh water from the kitchen and gave it a good scrubbing with the lye soap until the stain was no longer visible and all the braids were once again their intended color. The rug went on to the railing next to the sheets. He looked at the mattress Bobby Joe slept on. It had one flat pillow and a threadbare blanket on it, not so much as a sheet. What kind of bed was that for a growing child? Suddenly the shame was more than he could bear. Exhausted from the rigorous cleaning and soul-weary from the memories of his mistreatment of his wife and children, he flung himself on the mattress and cried out loud, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Suddenly the room was infused with a warm, bright light, and a voice whispered in his ear, But you hath he made alive, who were dead in trespasses and sins. And as quickly as the light appeared, it disappeared. But Hank knew it had been there because the light still shone in his soul. He rose from the mattress a new creation. Old things had passed away, and all things became new. He had been dead in his sins and trespasses, he acknowledged, but now he was alive, alive like never before, and he would be better. He'd been given a new lease on life. This time, he would do it right. The day before Jenny was to leave the hospital, Dottie came to visit. She brought pictures that Bobby Joe had drawn for her. Bobby Joe was excited that her mommy was coming home. Jenny missed both her daughters desperately. She thanked Dottie for keeping and caring for them all this time. It was her pleasure, she said. She also had other news to share. She'd read in the paper that Hank had been released on house arrest and was completing an AA course. Good for him, she told Dottie. Inside, her heart skipped a bit. Was this the hand of God at work? Dottie asked Jenny if she'd like to stay with them when she was released, until she could figure out where to live. Jenny thanked her for the offer, but said she had a place to go, and she would pick up the kids in a couple of days, if that was all right. Of course, Dottie replied with a hug. Jenny had shared that she'd reconciled with her father. She's probably going to stay with him, she reasoned. Later that day, Stan came to visit. He once again came bearing store-bought flowers. He hugged his daughter and exclaimed how good she was looking. She felt good, too, she told him. Would you like to come live with me when you get out? He asked, hopeful. Me and the kids would be a lot for a man who's been batching it for years, she explained. I have a place to go, but I'd really like it if me and the kids could come over on Sundays after church and spend the day with you. That sounds great, her father said. She's probably going to stay with Dottie, he thought. After all, she has her kids. I'm so glad she has a friend like Dottie. He would be forever grateful to the woman who saved his daughter's life. God's mysterious ways. The next day, Jenny Lynn was released from the hospital. A cab was waiting at the main entrance to take her wherever she wanted to go. It had been arranged by the benefactor, she'd been told. She gave the driver directions to the home she shared with Hank. He was still her husband after all, and she was still his wife. As the cab left and she started to walk up the drive, everything looked new to Jenny Lynn. The copse of trees to the right had been pruned and thinned. They now lined the right side of the drive, instead of creating an intimidating barrier along it. The front porch steps had been reinforced, and the porch painted a cheery yellow color. A new porch swing had been hung. This porch no longer resembled the one she was married upon nearly 5 years ago. She turned the knob and entered the home. Here, too, there were differences everywhere she looked. In the living room, the couch had been recovered with a cheery yellow and blue flowered slipcover, and matching curtains hung on the window. The rocker was gone, and a lazy boy recliner, used but in good shape, had taken its place. The wood stove was cleaned, and wood had been neatly stacked beside it. In the kitchen, the lawn chairs were gone, and 4 modest but sturdy dinette chairs stood around the kitchen table, which had been lemon oiled to a shine, the smell lingering and freshening the entire room. The metal sink had been cleaned and polished. An inspection of the cupboard and fridge revealed that both had been stocked with healthy, nutritious food. Was she in the right house? Had Hank done all this? Suddenly she was worried. Did Hank rent the house to someone else? Was she trespassing here? She began a frantic search for Hank. She didn't find him in the bedroom, but she did find a new bedspread on the bed and clean sheets. and Betty Sue's crib had been moved in next to the bed. That prompted her to check out the nursery. The curtain divider had been removed, and the girls' clothes now occupied the shelves in the bathroom. A new white metal daybed occupied the space where the crib and Bobby Joe's mattress had been. It had fresh, clean sheets and a Disney bedspread and matching pillow sham. The room had been painted little girl pink, and a rag rug held the place of honor in the middle of the room. It, too, had been laundered. Everything was fresh and clean, new. But where was Hank? As she headed through the house toward the backyard, she heard what sounded like hammering outside. She opened the door and stepped onto the back porch to find the old wash tub in the yard being used as a planter, and her husband up a ladder, attaching a rafter to some wood framing he'd erected next to the house. "Hank?" she questioned. Hank froze, hammer in mid-swing. He looked toward the voice. "Jenny? Jenny Lind? Is it really you?" He tossed down the hammer and scurried down the ladder as fast as he could go, green light shining from his ankle as he descended. Without thinking, he scooped his wife up into his arms until he felt her stiffen, and he abruptly let go. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he said. "I was just so excited to see you. I didn't think, couldn't hope." She smiled at the look of concern on her husband's face, grabbed his hand, and said, "Let's go inside, Hank. We have a lot to talk about." In the kitchen, Hank poured a glass of lemonade for his wife and one for himself into new plastic tumblers, and they sat in the new chairs around the kitchen table. "The house, Hank? Everything is new." "Everything is right," he corrected. "Everything is the way it should have been all along. And the house isn't the only thing made new." He went on to tell her about his conversion on the mattress, his first day home. "The same thing happened to me," she excitedly exclaimed. She told him how she died, and the voice whispered resurrection power into her ear and brought her back to life. Then she shared about the mysterious benefactor who paid for the hospital bills and supplied the taxi ride home. He too had a mysterious benefactor, she discovered, who paid for all the groceries and upgrades to the house. "It must be the same person," Hank surmised. "I wonder who it could be," they both said in unison. The couple talked long into the night, each sharing their experiences of late and asking forgiveness for wrongs done in their marriage. They decided that since they were each new, their marriage should be too. This would be their new anniversary from now on. They lovingly and considerately consummated their union on their new bedspread, and it was glorious. The next day, Virginia called her father and asked if he would give her a ride to Dottie's to pick up the girls. "I thought you were staying there," he asked, confused. "No, Papa. I'm home with Hank, where I belong." Stan's voice suddenly registered fear. "Oh, honey, do you think that's a good idea? A leopard doesn't change its spots." "You're right, Papa, but the God who created the leopard can change his spots. Come by and see for yourself." Stan arrived a short time later. He was amazed by the changes he saw as he came up the drive. Hank answered the door at his knock. "Stan, won't you please come in?" he invited. Stan looked wary, but followed Hank into the living room. "Would you mind loaning your car to Jenny Lind so she can go get the girls while we stay here and talk? I'm afraid we have much to settle between us." Well, he couldn't argue with that. Stan handed his daughter his keys and kissed her cheek as she left. Hank walked past him to kiss his wife goodbye before she got off the porch. They looked like a couple in love to Stan. Jenny Lynn and the girls returned to find the two men laughing over a shared story. Hank had shared his conversion and had begged forgiveness for cheating Stan out of his daughter and for mistreating her and for killing Stan's grandchild. The two men had cried, then hugged, and were now laughing. Once in the door, Bobby Joe ran to Hank. "Daddy!" she screamed, running to him with her arms wide open. Hank scooped her up and swung her around. The little girl giggled with glee. "And who is this lovely lady?" Stan asked, removing Betty Sue from his daughter's arms to hold her in his. "That's Sisser," Bobby Joe said. She became Sisser Sue from that day on. Jenny sat in the new recliner and watched her husband and her father with their children. Everyone was happy. Everyone was feeling loved. It was a day she thought she would never see. She marveled at the miraculous workings of God. That Sunday, the Sutters went to the Baptist church together, where they renewed their vows and dedicated their children and set themselves apart to love and serve God as a family. As service was wrapping up, Jenny saw a familiar face out of the corner of her eye. Grabbing her husband's arm, she said, "Hank, come with me. There's someone I want you to meet." She tapped the man's shoulder and as he turned, said to her husband, "This is the taxi driver that brought me home last week." The two men stared at each other, mouths open, neither saying a word. Finally, Hank managed to stutter, "Jenny Lynn, that's my father." Sunday dinner was held at the Sutter's house. Both Stan and the taxi driver were in attendance. "I couldn't handle being on the property without your mom there," he explained to Hank over pot roast, pleading for him to understand. "But after a while I felt bad about abandoning you and started checking up on you every now and then. I saw that you were drinking and were mean, so I decided to keep my distance. Then, when I heard you were arrested and Virginia Lynn was in the hospital, I just had to do something." Jenny and Hank looked at each other and exclaimed in unison, "You're the mysterious benefactor." "Guilty as charged," George Sutter admitted. "But where did you get all that money?" Hank asked. "I took the money we were going to build the homestead with and made some wise investments instead. I wanted to give a chunk of it to you, son, but I was afraid it would all be spent on liquor." Hank shrugged, a guilty look on his face. "It probably would have been. But when you were really in need of help, I found a way to provide it," he finished humbly. Hank hugged his father's neck. "All is forgiven, and we are very grateful for the help." "I wish there was more I could do," George said. "There is," Hank said with a grin. "Oh?" "Yeah, I'm building on a real bathroom with running water, a toilet, a tub, and a shower. I could use some help from someone who knows how to build a homestead." "You're on," George said, clapping his son on the shoulder. Not wanting to be left out, Stan said, "Well, I'm no great builder, but I can swing a hammer." Jenny put her children to bed, the baby in their room and Bobby Joe in her new Disney bed in her new pink room. She did dishes while the men gathered around the framing outback to discuss plans for the new bathroom. She marveled anew at the resurrection power that had been breathed into her relationships. She and her husband were happy and in love. They both had renewed relationships with their fathers, and everyone adored and loved on the children. She could never have anticipated this day in a million years. It was just another of God's mysterious ways. I hope you enjoyed the reading of Resurrection Power. What a mighty God we serve. This was fiction, but our God is very real, and He does move in these ways in people's lives. Now that we know, We just have to spread the word. Please like this and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and tell all of your friends so that they can listen to it and learn about the wonderful God we serve. Thank you so much for helping me spread the word. God bless.